Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Hope for the Soul podcast. I'm excited to have, I think, our second or third guest this season. Our first guest via Zoom, so it took us a minute to get it all worked out. But Josh knows that it's going to take me a little bit to get things worked out. But I'm happy to have my longtime friend, Josh Youngblood, pastors in Little Elm, Texas, here on the podcast. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, Trent. Thanks, buddy. Good to be here.
Yep. Well, Kayla's not here. She normally opens every episode with a cheesy joke. And so now...
Most of those are pretty bad.
Most of them are pretty... That's what Dad and I tell her. Like, the jokes are so bad, but you're the one that makes it funny. It's your delivery.
Do we need a bad joke? I don't want to break protocol. Do we need one?
Josh, give us a bad dad joke. Let's go.
Okay. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Owls.
Owls who?
Yes, they do.
This is so good. You're right. And you probably have two or three more too.
Listen, that's my, I go to networking events for the Chamber of Commerce, and we have to open up, and I usually start with a bad joke and then move into something professional, but I always start with a stupid joke.
And that's what you started with this morning, huh?
Absolutely.
That's good. Hey, for those of you watching and listening, I want to tell you that my dad, Pastor Smith, his book is going to be released June 1st. I've got hard copy, came in yesterday, so I want to promote that. You can buy those anywhere books are sold online, or you can go to arkentsmith.com and you can order there. So, Josh, but thanks again for being here. We go way back. I think we were 9 when we met, maybe 10 or 11.
Yes, sir.
And
been a minute.
At the campgrounds in Lufkin, we were texting the other day with our wives, and you said we've been friends for 30 years. It's all right.
That's shocking.
And that made, I'm like we're not old, but that made me feel old, bro.
We're not that old, Trent, but here we are. I mean, we're late 30s. I'll be 39 this year, so that math tracks. If you do the math and adds up. So here we go.
That's great. All right, so let's dive in. When we were preparing for this, we're just talking about, my first question to you is, Josh, what are you passionate about? And you gave me a list of things you're passionate about. Hit me up with what you're passionate about right now.
I mean, there's several things on that list, Trent. We talked about Bluebell ice cream,
That's right.
which I don't know if we could do a whole podcast around that. I would say we could talk about, Dallas sports, but being where Hope for the Soul there, you guys are so close to Houston, we probably leave that alone too. And I would be a rude friend to talk about how bad the Astros are this year. So I'm not even going to do that. Let's just move on past that. And I would say, as far as passionate, I would say, obviously church planning is a passion, church culture, and how do we do what we're supposed to do, right? How do we take this great commission? How do we take what we read in the Word of God and make that relevant today? Not that the Word of God needs help.
That's right.
But how do we frame that into our current context and culture, and get people fired up about being disciples of Christ?
Yeah.
I think that's probably would be, I would say, a passion that drives what we do here.
Yeah. So I view myself as not a church planner, but a guy that's taking over a church that's been planted. And so as a church, like, you're raising kids who are church planners, and I see myself in your boys. And so our situations are a lot different because I have the blessing of longevity that I'm stepping into. But I also view that I've got a 172 member launch team, versus you're gutting something out from the ground up. But from a friend, I want you to know that you're a hero to me. And
I appreciate that.
What you're doing, bro. We've had a lot of conversations. Most we can't have here about church planning, but the really vulnerable and man, you and Shelly, y'all stuck it out through some incredible.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Trent, Grace Church turned 6 last week. So 6 years old. And again, you guys know church plant context. Your dad planted that church there in Conroe when you were just a baby. Yeah. And looking at, our thought, our philosophy is we want to get to be Conroe Church, right? We want to get to that second generation leader. Yeah. Want to get to that longevity, hit a couple of decades. And so the statistics there are not great, as you guys know. And I'm sure, your dad could speak to it also, the number of church plants that didn't make it. Yeah. But I think the numbers, if you trust the numbers, they are what they are. Something like 80% of church plants, and that's regardless of flavor, regardless of denominational background, but 80% don't make it 3 years, right? Yeah. And so looking at that, then you get past that 3-year mark, take a deep breath, and then the numbers really don't get much more encouraging from that point, right? That of the 20% that make it 3 years, 10% of those churches may see a membership of 100. And so then you kind of understand, then you look at the numbers, what we consider to be an average sized church in North America. Of course, that number is changing, but that number now is hovering around mid 60, 65, 66.
And it was so 80s pre-COVID.
Looking at that. Yeah, right, yeah. Right. And so then you kind of understand from a church planner perspective, okay, we're starting from the ground up. It's not, we count what counts, right? So it's not that we just say that the person is a number, but we understand what that represents. And we understand the families that are being transformed and changed and all of those things. But we also understand that the church, you're going to have leaders. You're going to have laborers. You're going to have people that come alongside to catch the vision. And so from a church planner perspective, and just rein me in at any point, Trent, but just kind of where we are to kind of give you some context for this season we're in. Our first 2 years planting a church, we were setting up, tearing down at a local middle school, and God blessed us. We had favor. I served on a couple of committees in our city and met the school superintendent. And it worked out for us to set up and tear down. In fact, they were very kind, generous with the rate. I think we paid $360 a month when we started.
Wow.
And that was even with us having access on Saturday night to set everything up, and then we could practice music, we could pray, and then come back Sunday, have church, tear it down. So they were very, very kind. But then Grace Church turned 2 during a global pandemic. And I led off with those numbers. 80% don't make it 3 years. That is without a COVID-19 global pandemic. And so we were kind of in this spot where, the school locked us out. They weren't sure what they were dealing with. Nobody was sure what we were dealing with. And so we spent 12 weeks in an online only environment with no place to call home, and found, I'm sitting in our church now, found a CrossFit gym that we rehabbed, renovated, and we moved into this facility in August of 2020. So we're coming up on 4 years here. But kind of to give you some context, our first couple of years was really about, okay, we're starting this thing, we're going to go for it. We knew when we launched our church, Shelly and I and our 2 boys, Mason and Landry, the 4 of us moved to Little Elm from a great church that sent us, Pastor Gene Holly, Wichita Falls. And we came to Little Elm. We knew there'd be 4 at church. And we started with some monthly previews, built a team up, had a couple from our youth team in Wichita Falls come and join us, and a few others. And so launched a weekly service. You guys were at our first weekly Sunday.
I'll never forget.
That was May the 6th, 2018. And so we spent the first couple of years trying to survive, trying to find our footing and catch our breath and sort of set us up for the future. And so you really just were digging something out. Again, God has been so good, and we've seen God do amazing things, and God's brought people to the church, and we're looking at all that God's done, and you can't help but look back when you hit a milestone, and the 6th anniversary, just looking at it, understanding that Trent, our roster, who we're looking for every Sunday, that list there's 140 names on that list, and when you look at the people that called their church and the people that Grace Church is theirs, and we see them, monthly, or we see them every, 6 weeks, or whatever faithfulness looks like to them. That number now, we're somewhere between 160 and 170 people. And we know, listen, we've worked hard, and I'm not, it is what it is, but God has blessed us. And so that kind of, to give you some context, we've reached a place last year where we sort of started kind of having to shift our focus, because, okay, we feel like we've done a good job of starting this church from the ground up, but now we were at a critical juncture where if we're going to see year 10, if we're going to be sustainable, there's this tipping point in our culture where we have to sort of not necessarily shift focus, but expand focus, and really start focusing in on what does leadership development look like, and how are we how are we being good stewards of what God's given us, whether that, obviously financially, but also the people that God has sent and the people that God has built here, that have become part of the fabric and the DNA of our church. how do we develop them? And so we started looking at that towards the end of last year and really kind of nailing down some leadership positions. I say positions, it's one team, but understanding that what we saw, Trent, is while everybody wants to be involved and everybody wants to jump in, there's almost a hesitancy of, I don't want to overstep, I don't want to assume. And so we start looking at that and realizing, hey, what we probably need to do is really spend some time defining, what we're looking for. And we really need to spend some time developing some strategy around, what does a leadership team look like, and what are specific roles that we're looking for on this team, and how does this team, we look at a wheel, the spokes that make this circle wheel, and then explaining that as we move forward, there's going to be times that different leaders would be on top. Right, they're going to be there. They might be it might be their turn to be in front or on top. But there better be 5 or 6 spokes underneath supporting the weight, or we're not. It's a flat tire, and we're moving, but we're not moving efficiently. And so that's kind of been what we've been digging into over the last 6 months, and really thankful to see what God's doing there.
Well, that's really some of the same things that me and Kayla are figuring out in our leadership, and as we try to scale as well. It's, to use your analogy, I was thinking you got the right, I forget the guy who wrote the book, but he talked about you have to have the right people at the right seat in the
Jim
bus.
Collins.
Yes. And your spokes analogy on the wheel is the same thing. You have to get the right people plugged in. Otherwise, as you said, it's disproportionate. The wheel doesn't roll as smoothly as it should. But also, John Maxwell writes about the law of the lid, and for you and I to do what we're doing, making space for others, we have to search within ourselves and make space and raise our expectations and raise our level of leadership. Because a healthy church is going to grow, and a healthy church is only going to grow if it has a healthy leader. And so we're having to dig deep and do the work to make sure that we can create sustainable growth underneath us. And I love what you said. You said you can't build a church culture on one Sunday, but you build it every Sunday, when we were talking a couple weeks ago. Dive in a little to that, about how that healthy church culture plays into your leadership team.
Yeah. So, and I think that's sometimes what we're guilty of if we're not careful is we sort of gear up for the big Sundays. We circle Easter on the calendar, and we anticipate we're going to flip a switch and we'll be best foot forward, and we're going to rock it on Easter. And I would say, again, my context currently is a church plant, but I remember being on staff at, established, what we would call legacy churches, established churches, and those churches are gearing up for Easter Sunday, and that's where, listen, that's not the Sunday for the guy that's learning how to play drums. We're not asking him that Sunday. It's not the time. We're not trying out a new singer, we're going to try you out on a Wednesday night in a legacy church, right? And so understanding then that we're looking ahead to this big event, and hey, we're going to have first-time guests here, and we're going to have people that need the Holy Ghost. We're going to have people that need to be baptized, and so let's present the gospel in our best foot forward. I would say one of the contextual differences between that and a church plant is that's every Sunday. For us, like every Sunday, there are first-time guests. There are people that are walking in. In fact, we're grateful, Trent. But I don't know, in the 4 years we've been in this building, we could count on one hand, maybe 2 hands. Okay, I'll say that, maybe less than 10 Sundays without first-time guests that have walked in, and so we thank God for that. But it's understanding then that when you speak to culture, we can't just flip a switch. We can't just, we got a big Sunday coming up, let's all be on our A game. The facts are every Sunday is somebody's big Sunday.
That's right.
And when we understand that from a leadership standpoint, we don't have a Sunday to take off. We don't have a Sunday that doesn't matter, because again, we recognize this could be the catalyst for life change. This could be the tipping point. Somebody's eternity weighs in the balance Sunday. And so then what we look at from a culture standpoint is, hey, we understand that everything we do is to connect people to Jesus. I tell our team often we can be 2 things, right? We can be a wall that prevents somebody else from getting in. We can be that crowd of people that Zacchaeus had to find a tree to see over, or we can be a bridge.
So good.
And connect people to Jesus. And the thing about being a bridge is that really you're not functioning like you're supposed to function until people can step on you to get to Jesus. And so then having that culture that understands, hey, look, it's not about me. There may be some people here that get on our nerves. There may be some people here that walk in and seemingly treat us like we're beneath them. But if we're doing our job as leaders, then we are. We are beneath them because we're designed to be a bridge supporting the weight of somebody else that they may see Jesus, that we can get them connected to that. Colin Powell, he said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is a habit, not an event. And there's lots of different, I think Aristotle said something similar. Lots of people have made a similar quote. But I think that is kind of what, when you talk about culture, talk about church culture, that has to be, the way we do anything is the way we do everything, right? And so if we're going to be excellent, if we're going to put our best foot forward, we understand, Trent, our context, your context, we are not the biggest church in our town. We don't have the biggest budget in our town. Amen, somebody. I wish we did, but we don't. And so knowing then we can look at what we don't have and we can emphasize what we don't have. Or we can look around and like the boy who had the sack lunch, it was willing to give it. If I'm willing to surrender what I do have, and I'm willing to surrender what's under my control, and I can control being on time, and I can control making sure it's clean, and I can control my attitude and my face, and I can make sure that there's a smile on my face and I can't wait to see you. When we start focusing in on what we can control, it's creating this atmosphere that really makes it welcoming, inviting, and we don't have to be intimidated by a big budget church. We don't have to be intimidated by a 10,000 member mega church, because we understand I'm not in competition with anybody. I'm here that somebody's going to walk through these doors and need to experience the grace of God.
So our church partners with Global Missions. Your church gives to Global Missions and North American Missions. And, we believe this. You are a missionary. I am a missionary. Our friend David McGovern has been on a rant the last few months about this, and his message at launch a couple of months ago was unbelievable about this, and it's revolutionized me. So vision leaks, and how are you instilling the fact that not only is Josh and Shelley and Mason Landry, we are missionaries, but our greeting team in the lobby, they're missionaries. Our youth and young adult team, our worship team, what are you doing, or what are some ways that we can ensure that our mentality as senior leaders leaks down? Let's just get real practical. I know we didn't talk about this one, but we're following the clock.
Yeah, no, that's great. So again, you said vision leaks, and it does. And so understanding then that there is going to be leakage, we've got to make sure that the vision is something that we talk about. There's so many things that impact culture. Vision is certainly one of the key contributors to culture. And so we talk about it, what matters. And we talk about what's the catalyst for our church and how everything that we do ties back to it. The mission at Grace Church, you'll see it all around the building. It's on our print materials. It's on our T-shirts. In fact, you can see it behind me in a
right
couple
now.
Yeah. But the mission of our church is to see to it that no one misses the grace of God. And we emphasize the no one. I think as a movement, we have been comfortable reaching for down and outers. We've been comfortable reaching for those that were obviously broken, visibly broken. And we feel like, man, the gospel can change your life. But at Grace Church, we have intentionally also said, look, we believe the gospel is for the person whose exterior seems to be put together. It's for the person that seems like they've got it all figured out. Because really, if this is a transformation gospel, if this is something that gives us hope, not just in this life, but in the next life, then it really is an experience we think everybody should have. And so because of that, we're reaching for movers and shakers. We're reaching for haves and have-nots. We as a church, we emphasize that we're going to reach down, we're going to reach out, but we're going to reach up.
That's good.
We want our officials here. We want city leaders here, and they come. And part of that is just building that culture where we understand who we are. We understand what we're here to do. And so our church is not, it's not going to be a different church if the mayor comes. He comes often. It's not going to be a different church if we have our state representative walk in, if our school board superintendent walks in, if any of our city council, town council, if they walk in, like they understand this is where our church is going to be the same. And I think part of that, again, speaks to the culture of we believe this is for everybody. And if that's the case, then every leader and every person that's involved, every person that serves, we have a little sign next to our lanyards, and this is not unique with our church, but there's a little sign next to everybody that grabs a staff lanyard on Sunday, and the sign says, thank God we get to be part of the story that God's writing.
Yeah.
And I think that when you understand that what a privilege it is that God would partner with us. In fact, he's built a career. You read through the word of God over and over and over. It's the divine that's partnering with the human. And it's this God of glory who chooses regular, mediocre people to be hands and feet. And you look at what Jesus did with this, gang of bad news bears and the disciples and how they changed the world. But I think all of that speaks to culture. Matthew 9:35 through Matthew 10:1, it kind of spans 2 chapters there. You read where Jesus, he's talking about this need. He sees the vast just people, and there's this endless need, and he's healing, he's proclaiming the good news of the gospel. And then he calls his disciples together, his leaders, and he delegates authority to them. And he says, now you go do this. I want you to proclaim the same message, but I want you to go, and I'm sending you with my authority and with my spirit. And so I think there's something to that Jesus was not intimidated to include others in the mission. And the principle then for us is that if Jesus needed others, if Jesus needed people to be involved, then as leaders, that's really something that's telling for us. At Grace Church, if I could say it this way, and I've been reading several different books, I could certainly give you a list of those, but we want to build a culture that's not necessarily focusing on building a platform for me as the pastor of this church, but rather we want to build a pipeline, right? That there's not there's 2 cultures. Will Mancini talks about it in his book, Future Church, but there's really 2 church cultures. One of them is do what now?
I just bought that book. I haven't read it yet.
So. Oh, it's fantastic. So one of them talks about celebrity status versus spiritual authority. And the celebrity status model says that if your eyes are not on me, then I'm losing. And you see some church leaders, whether it's a worship leader, worship pastor, whether it's a senior pastor, there's this mentality of if I'm not out front, if you're not seeing me, then I'm losing, versus the idea of delegation. So let me sort of merge here. I'm a banker during the day, right? So professionally, I've been a vice president with a bank for a number of years. And so the example here that I want to use to kind of illustrate this principle is, Trent, I could add you as a signer on our checking account. But if I were to add you as a signer on our account, that does not mean that I no longer have the ability to sign checks.
That's so good.
It's not taking my authority away. What it's doing is it's multiplying my authority. And now I've delegated and given you the authority to do something as well. And so that is kind of what we look at as a church. Like we want to, if God's going to trust us, we talked about leaders earlier. If God's going to trust us with people that can lead, then we've got to be stewards of leaders. And we've got to build a culture then that empowers leaders to run. And that's probably a whole nother conversation.
That's what I was just about to say is you've been using the word delegation, and that's a great word, but that word brings on a whole new meaning when we say empowerment. In other words, I'm not just wanting you to do a task. I'm empowering you with authority to do this task. And you're doing this in the name of the church or in the name of God.
I think the sweet spot, and we've talked about it in our leadership meetings and in our team huddles and stuff, but the sweet spot there is, I, as the pastor of our church, I don't have to be involved with every decision. I don't want to be, but I also don't want to be surprised, if that makes sense. And so what we've been able to talk about then is, okay, look, we want leaders that are able to run. But if in your race as a leader, if you're running and you're running so far ahead that you can't see the other leaders, or if you're running so far behind that you can't see, then we're not running, we're unequally yoked.
That's good.
And so if we're gonna run, we need to be running at a pace that is sustainable. We need to be running at a pace that somebody else can run with us. And I think that's when we talk about a leadership culture, it's that understanding, hey, look, we've got to do this together. And lead together. And that means there's going to be times that something isn't done exactly the way you would do it.
Yeah.
I think the leadership principle, and I forget who says it, forgive me, but if somebody can do it 80% as good as you can, let them.
Let them do it.
Because that's opening stuff up for you. And that's a biblical principle. All the way back in Acts chapter 6, we find that, one of the church is growing, and with church growth comes problems. One philosopher said, "More people, more problems." But the idea there in the early church is that, hey, we've got these people that are gifted to teach, to preach, to speak, and we really need to delegate some of these other things so that we can operate in our giftings. And that's where you find Stephen and the others are, they're anointed, they're appointed, they're sent. They're given authority to do the work of the ministry. And so I think that's the model. And again, Trent, you're supposed to interrupt me. You said start talking about something you're passionate about, and I don't know how much time we have, and you're not interrupting, so I'm going to shut up and let you say something.
So I want to pivot using this same, I guess, foundation of empowerment and delegation. And, our job, the role of the fivefold ministry, is to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. And so a lot of what we do as a tour guide, a lot of what we do is lifting others up and building others up so that they can run. What I'm discovering, and maybe you can talk about this, how do we train people and equip people, empower them to run, but to run at a sustainable pace? Like, isn't that's something that I struggle with? I'm sure that's something that you struggle with. I mean, you're bivocational. You've got a lot of irons and a lot of fires. And so how are you ensuring that you are at a sustainable pace, your family, but also Vision Leaks, the people that are serving with you at Grace?
Yeah. So again, you kind of look at, that's such a tough question, and I don't think it has an easy answer.
It doesn't.
You have to figure out your rhythms. So the way the rhythms work here at our church, we have a monthly meeting with our core leadership team, where we're walking through, hey, here's what we've done, here's what we've had recently, here's what we've got going on. And so we sort of look at what we've done and what we've got coming. From a calendar standpoint, we look at 3 months, right? Debrief, and then also look ahead. So that's one of the ways we do that. But then two, tagging in between, obviously we got to talk more than once a month, but that's sort of given us that framework of, hey, we know we've got this coming up. This is what's next. Keeping that important, but then also, in your own family, figuring out, hey, there's got to be some downtime. There's got to be some time that, you've got to figure out ways to do that. So we look for that very intentionally, as a family. Obviously, being bivocational, I work a job too. And so there's sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge. Yeah. But then we look for intentionality. How do we, so for example, there's, if we know we've got a baseball practice, for example, we've done this recently, where there was a baseball practice on a Monday night from 6 to 8. Well, since we're going to be out of the house anyway, we've got plans anyway. It just so happens there's a great Mexican food restaurant right across the street from the baseball field, and so we can leave a boy at baseball practice and meet with a family or a couple that y'all can meet us. Let's get enchiladas. And we can eat enchiladas and not play baseball, but really we're sort of accomplishing two things, right? So that's, I would say that's part of it, is finding that piece and that rhythm to how do I manage time, and how do we get time together?
That's something that we're dealing with here at Conroe Church, is because we have a fresh batch of leadership that's coming up on the scene, some younger than us, some older than us, but in their excitement and in their zeal, and even mine and Kayla's excitement and zeal, sometimes we've learned that we can do too much of a good thing and we get our life out of balance and out of whack. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you said to interrupt.
No, you're good. And I don't know. I mean, I think balance is a great buzzword and great concept. I don't know that we're ever going to be balanced in every sense of the word. I don't know that. I mean, it seems like Jesus lived with a singular pursuit. It seems like he was focused on mission from the moment he got here. I understand that none of us are Jesus. But so I don't know that I'm a proponent of the idea that we should always be balanced in every area of our life. I think there's a difference in that idea and also the idea of being out of control. You mentioned, okay, how do we train? How do we model leadership? How do we show this? And I would say, one of the greatest ways to do that is through observation. Right. And so that means, we talked about earlier, if I'm running too far ahead that nobody can see me, then the pace is not right. And so one of the things we have talked to leaders and tried to emphasize here is, well, let's do it together. Let's make sure we're involving other people. I've tried to model that. And then two, talking to leaders. Hey, can you do it faster by yourself? Probably. Is it more beneficial if you include someone? Absolutely. Anybody that's ever built something with the help of their kids understands sometimes, man, it's easier to just do it. But we also understand we're multiplying. That's the goal here. And so if I want a leader that's empowered, if I want a leader to run, then they've got to be able to walk with me for a while. They've got to be able to see how, what we're doing and catch the vision of the house. And, if I want an engaged, for example, if I want an engaged and friendly church, then as the senior pastor, I can't sit in my office with the door shut and then exit my office and come through a side door in the middle of the first song and go to an assigned seat and preach. But as soon as I'm leaving, as soon as I finish the sermon, have an usher, escort me quickly to get back into my office and shut the door and count money. That's not how that works.
We wish,
right? And so,
but shepherds need to smell like sheep.
It's not how it works.
Yeah.
And so if I want a friendly church, then I got to be a friendly pastor. If I want a church that's welcoming and inviting, then at Grace Church, I'm just going to tell you, 6 years, that's 300 Sundays plus. I'm at the front door of our church, and you cannot come to Grace Church without hugging me, shaking my hand. Like, you're going to have to get past me to get inside. And surprise, when you get inside, Shelly is waiting for you in the foyer, and you're not going to get past her. Like, you're not even going to get to the coffee until she's met you and hugged you and loved on you. And so that has created this culture then where our church is welcoming and inviting and friendly, because we try to be welcoming, friendly, and inviting. You look at, if you want a church, if you want a culture where people are excited to invite people to church with them, then let them see somebody come with you.
That's good.
So good. And I think that's something from our perspective as a church plant. Obviously, we're in the community, we're meeting people, but there's people that come to church because I've invited them. Yeah. I met them, I befriended them. And then I'm quick to point that out. When they walk up, there's my friend. And I'm telling everybody outside on our greet team, hey, this is how I met them. And we, recently, 3 weeks ago, there was a family that walked in for the first time. Because I met them through a Chamber of Commerce networking event. And Trent, it's a crazy story. We ended up opening a checking account for this family. And when I met with them, I was talking about their business, and we opened up an account, and they had looked me up and knew I was a pastor. Of course, at the Chamber, I don't hide that. I'll typically say something like, I'm Josh with Bank OZK and Grace Church. I can help you with your faith or your finances. It's sort of like a tag that I'll throw out. And so they looked me up, found that I was a pastor. I send over documents, and the response to me was, hey, what if we just sign the documents and bring them to church Sunday? We want to check out your church. And so, perfect, come on. And that was 3 Sundays ago. They haven't missed.
Love it.
And one of those things where you're seeing they're in a Bible study started this week, and their little boy was involved in our Mother's Day program Sunday. And so you start to see this. But for me, it's not just a win of, hey, there's a new family that's coming to church. It's a win because I can demonstrate, hey, look, when you open your mouth and share your faith, when you let your faith be not something that's regulated to a 2-hour window on Sunday, an hour on midweek, unless you can find an excuse not to go. If we can make faith authentic and part of us, then it becomes this easy conversation. And so that, again, that's one of the things that we want to be observable. We want to be a leader that you can, see what we do. It's something that can be replicated. It's something that we feel like is really, and again, just answer your question in a roundabout way to speak to pace. If I'm going so quickly that you can't see the steps, if I'm going so quickly that you can't see the path and you can't replicate, then I'm going too fast.
That's good.
At the same time, if I'm so indecisive and if I'm so apprehensive that I'm not allowing a leader to run, to move forward, then that's frustrating for leaders. And I mentioned earlier, we talked about, wanting leaders to run and wanting leaders to feel empowered. But if the leader pursues this culture of celebrity, I'm the most important voice, I'm the only voice, et cetera, versus delegation, then essentially what we're doing, what we're asking our leaders, Trent, is we're asking our leaders to operate under this assumption that says that your calling is to watch me work in mine. And I think, and again, I'm borrowing that's too good to be something that I thought of last night. But that's Will Mancini makes that point in his book. It's like, if that's the case, if it's about us and we're a threatened leader, then that's what, none of us would ever say that out loud. But what we're communicating is, hey, we think you're called and we think you're anointed, but we think your anointing and gifting and calling on your life really is to sit on the sidelines in our kingdom and watch me pursue my calling. And I don't think that's what God had in mind.
All right. So I want to respect your time. I know you have to be somewhere in about a half hour or so, but I want to give you plenty of time to get there. We talked a little bit about accountability, and you said something, and I forgot about that, but you said something that was in our text messages. You said something a few minutes ago that sometimes you have to pull a leader close, and I forget your exact words, but if you're not willing to get close to me and walk with me, then you're probably not ready to lead yet. So let's talk about the ugly part of leadership, of following a leader, but also a leader training another leader, is holding them accountable and submitting to accountability.
Yeah. And so here's the reality. And I think this is not uncommon, but I think sometimes we want people to be leaders more than they do.
Yeah.
And sometimes we want more for them than maybe is for them.
Yeah.
And so, but when it comes to developing leaders, we have to, accountability is not church hurt.
Yeah.
And I think that's we're throwing out some buzzwords here, and I'm not minimizing church hurt. I'm not minimizing even abuse, because those things are very real.
Yes, they are.
But when it comes to accountability, I think accountability has to come from a place of love, right? And it has to be where, if I'm going to hold somebody accountable, then there has to have been some expectations that have been defined, but expectations not just defined but also modeled. So how can I hold you accountable? If I just expect you to do something and we've never clearly defined what that win looks like, we've never outlined, here's the steps to take, we've never given you a job description, we've never given you, or we're asking you to do something that we've never done or modeled, then that's not accountability. That would be, something that's really closer to an abuse type situation. Like, we're supposed to guess, we're supposed to just figure it out. And so I think that, when you have a difficult conversation, there needs to be some equity there. There needs to be where that leader understands, hey, there's love here, and what's being said to me, and the way it's being said, way it's being presented is really, at Grace Church we call them growth opportunities. But it's a chance for me to grow, and it's a chance for me, if I'm not growing, then I'm never going to be qualified to lead. And I think all of us over, the span of ministry and life have seen leaders that reach a place where they stop growing. And you look at a body of water, we want leadership to be almost like a river, right? That's flowing. There's movement there.
Yeah, no stagnation.
You compare a river that's sustaining life. It's bringing life. It's, again, from a pipeline perspective, if I'm going to grow leaders, then I need to grow leaders with the expectation that they're going to grow leaders, and that this is going to be something that's perpetual. You compare that image with an image of, a pond that really, if there's not a give and take, if there's not, any movement here, then what happens is you find a pond that's filled with algae and filled with, stuff that begins to choke the life out. And then, it's not long before there's not much life there. And then the next thing is it starts to stink. And it was never intended to be that way. But what happens with the ponds, it gets focused on retention, and it gets focused on, just holding what I have versus, is there any outlets? Is there any place for this to flow? And if it's not flowing, then eventually it's not living. And so I think that's something to consider as well. So, the leadership principle, there's a whole lot of them, but when it comes to accountability, I think it's, hey, we need to be able to have the conversation. But we've got to be able to have that conversation from a standpoint of, hey, we've defined some things before. The first conversation we have can't be this. We've already defined it.
Yeah.
It needs to be, hey, we're asking you to do something that we're already doing. It's been modeled for you. We've talked about it. And I'm just, holding accountable from a standpoint of, I want it the best for you. I want to see you take that next step. And that's whether you're looking at somebody that's moving into a preaching role or teaching role, never done that, and then being able to build up and highlight what was great, but also you're not doing anybody any favors if you're not able to say, hey, listen, I want to say, look, let me give you a couple things. And there's a lot of different approach. My mother was a tremendous kindergarten teacher.
Yes,
she taught pre-K for 20 years, God bless her.
Yeah.
And while she's no longer here, I remember something my mom would always talk about. She would have these meetings with kids and then more importantly, even with their parents. And she's trying to emphasize something that little Johnny needs to do better. There's going to be this parent teacher conference, this accountability piece, but mom would highlight something that she loved about Johnny. And mom had hugged Johnny so many times that he had gone home talking about Mrs. Youngblood and how much he liked Mrs. Youngblood. And then, so mom could point out something good. It's a sandwich approach, right? I can point out something good. I'm going to slide something in the middle. Now this is going to hurt, but you're going to have to work on this. You're going to have to fix this. And then at the end, we've got some other things that we think are going well. And so the challenge there is sometimes even with that approach, we'll have real thick pieces of bread on both ends. Here's all the wonderful things we think, and we got one little thin sliced deli piece of opportunity to grow. And so the challenge there is how much meat do we put on this sandwich? How much can we do in this conversation? But again, accountability isn't abuse. It's not church hurt, especially when it's coming from a loving relationship where there have been clearly defined expectations and culture has been modeled and it's an easy culture to follow.
I think this is a whole nother conversation that we do not have time for today, but I think a big portion of this and accountability being healthy is when that was a very big gulp of water. Kudos to you. Yeah. Is when accountability is most often effective and it's less personal. Whenever you have things in writing, for instance, this is the policy, this is the job description, this is how we do things. So that way, whenever we're having to have a conversation, a growth opportunity has presented itself, we can resort back to, well, this is what we agreed to. This is how we do things at Grace. This is how we do things at Conroe Church. So thanks, man, for your time. Do you have anything you want to share in closing?
No, I think I sat here and rambled. I'm not sure. I felt like I dominated the conversation, but thanks for having me.
No,
I love what you guys are doing.
That was the purpose, and this is our first time doing Zoom like this, so I hope it flowed good. So if you're listening and you liked it, give us some feedback. But Josh, I love you. I love you and Shelly. We got to get together soon. We're going to Branson soon, so maybe you guys can swing up for a day or two. I'll talk in a minute. Tell you those dates. Thanks everybody for listening to Hope for the Soul. We'll see you right here next week, next Friday. For our final episode of the season of Hope for the Soul. God bless. We'll talk soon.